Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER pod. I'm your host, Vecht, and each week I bring you stories of Jewish women who are blazing trails. This week's guest is Rachel Vecht. From classroom lessons to life lessons, Rachel shares her journey from teaching to founding Educating Matters, a business focused on parenting and work-life integration. She opens up about inclusion, identity, and the power of modeling the world we want to see. In the wake of October 7th, Rachel has also stepped up to raise awareness about antisemitism in the workplace, making her voice more vital than ever. Let's dive in. Rachel, welcome to the TrailBLAZER pod. It's so great to have you. How are you today?
I'm good, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So before we dive into everything we're going to talk about, I want to hear from you. Can you give us a snapshot of who you are today and the different roles and the hats you wear?
Okay, so I would say that my most important role is being a wife, a mother to 4 children who are currently between the ages of 23 and 15. I'm a modern Orthodox Jew, very active in my community. I'm based in London and started out my professional career as a school teacher and set up my own business. Next week, my son's 24, so I founded it when he was born, Educating Matters. And so I've had 2 babies.
Oh, congratulations.
Well, 5 babies actually, 4 kids and 1 business.
Yeah. I also just noticed the earring. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Amazing. Okay, so can you take us back a little bit to when you were a kid? What were you like? And then separately, how did Judaism play a role growing up? So I know now you're modern Orthodox, but I'm curious what it was like as a kid.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's asked me that for ages.
Really?
So that was an interesting question. So I was the first grandchild on both sides of the family. And I was really fortunate to have all 4 of my grandparents around until I reached adulthood.
Wow.
So I was really doted on. I'm really, really lucky. I only ever remember receiving unconditional love. And my father tells me that unlike my 2 younger brothers, I was perfectly behaved, never gave my family any grief. I was probably what you would call, I bet you don't have this expression in the US, but I was like a goody two shoes.
Oh, we have that. Of course we have that.
Yeah, really hardworking, really diligent, bit of a perfectionist. I think I started out very, very quiet and shy, which is ironic because I didn't actually speak till I was about 2.5, and now I do public speaking for a living. And from a really young age, find school projects where I wrote, when you say to kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always said a mummy and a teacher.
Wow.
So
Wow.
That's pretty much how it happened.
That's amazing.
And in terms of Judaism, so I was brought up in a very traditional home with a strong love of Judaism. I went to synagogue every week. I didn't go to a Jewish school, and I was one of the only small handful of kids who'd miss school for some of the holidays, which they thought I was making up. I also kind of grew up going to Israel at least once every year, but my understanding then was more of a hotel swimming pool or a quick trip at the Kotel. And then I actually met my husband in synagogue when I was 16. He was 22 or 23, so I don't want to think about my 15-year-old going out with someone that age, but it was all a different era. Yeah, and his family was much more observant, so soon after meeting him, I kind of fell into keeping Shabbat more properly.
Wow.
So that was kind of background.
I'm curious, you mentioned goody two-shoes. Do you find that you're like that as an adult, or you kind of learned how to maybe test the limits a little bit as you grew up?
Yeah, no, I've definitely learned to kind of just be a bit, I say goody two-shoes. I'm also quite chilled, so
Okay.
I'm on that journey of learning new experiences, and I've literally just today agreed to let my child miss 3 days of school to go to a wedding in Israel, and that was a big step. I just pressed the button, which I never would have done with my first child. So yeah,
Okay.
I'm just.
I think I asked because I was also as a little kid. I'm the oldest as well, so maybe it's an oldest thing where we feel we just also grow up with more adults because we don't have kids around us, right? So I also was kind of really good, always listened, was very respectful, but I think as I became a little bit older, I started challenging a little bit more in different ways. So I just wanted to know what it was like for you. So you did say you always wanted to be a mommy and a teacher. Where did that interest in teaching come from?
Well, I loved being with children.
Okay.
And I was also really fascinated by child development. So when I was at school, I used to volunteer every week in a school for disabled children. I used to cook with them. From a really young age, I ran the children's services in my synagogue every week. Every Sunday, I would teach Hebrew reading at Cheder. And I knew I wanted a really fulfilling career with purpose. Interestingly, at school, my teachers tried to put me off teaching as a career. And I did do like a 3 week, like they call it a mini pupillage work experience with a very eminent barrister, with the wig in court.
Wow.
But I decided actually, no, I wanted to stick with teaching.
Wow. Okay, so how long did you teach for?
So I taught for about like 6, nearly 7 years, and I also used to train student teachers, and I was like on this fast track program to be a head teacher. But whilst I was teaching quite early on, actually, I realized two pretty major things. One was that I was taught how to teach maths and English, for example, but the success of my students actually boiled down to their mindset and their attitude. So it wasn't so much what I was teaching. And that's where my fascination began, with the impact of words. So the power of words to either like really motivate or devastate, and creating that kind of psychological safety. So that was one thing. And the other thing I realized was that actually parents are a child's most important teacher. And being a parent, it's the hardest job in the world. You don't really get any training. So I started to support the parents of the kids I was teaching. And they'd be like, how come my child is so good at school? And I was like, that's because I'm not their parent. And I have loads of patience when it's not my own child. So I kind of thought I could have more of an impact on the lives of kids by working with parents.
So take me through that. Like you ended up leaving teaching and then you founded Educating Matters. So how
Yeah.
did that come about?
Well, a few things. One is like this vision of impacting the lives of children through parents. I also was very practical, so I wanted more autonomy and flexibility around how I worked. I wanted to be a present mom. It takes so much energy and time to be there for a kid. So I'm like, I can't do that for other people's children. And then by the end of the day, when I come to having my own, like I'm like flat out. So it was partly practical. I didn't have a business plan. I was a school teacher. There was no big vision with strategies and whatever. And actually, it started, I was really passionate about helping parents instill in children love of books. I was in someone's house. I did a talk about how kids learn to read. A guy from Goldman Sachs heard me speak, and he goes, will you come into my office one lunchtime? I have loads of colleagues that are parents. It's like, okay, it's a bit of a weird place to talk about reading, but fine. And I got such an amazing response that I literally picked up the phone to like Morgan Stanley and UBS, and then I'll call a few law firms. And the first law firm I called was like, what are you suggesting? What has this got to do with law? And I say, well, if your employees aren't worrying so much about what their kids are doing at home, they're going to be more productive at work. But it was really, really early days, and a few people were like, now it's much, the integration of work and life is more common.
Yeah. So what was the vision at first when you actually started Educating Matters?
Well, to be honest, it has literally evolved and kind of, I don't know, squiggled along based on what my corporate clients want. So I work with organizations all over the world: tech, banking, law, retail, car companies, pharmaceuticals, but whatever you can think of. And what I do is I really listen to the problems they're trying to solve, how they want to support their employees. And my expertise is everything to do with educating, raising children, integrating work and family. But over time, especially over the last 10, 12 years, the topics have really evolved. So things like female health, neurodiversity, being a carer. After George Floyd, we did loads on racism and allyship. And the big theme this year is intergenerations, that you have 5 different generations in the workplace, and gender and sexuality, and all these other topics. Being a carer, I don't know if it is in the US, but it's Carers Week and it's Pride Month. So
I don't think I've heard Carers Week. Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, which is people who have caring responsibilities for elderly or people with disabilities.
Wow. So it sounds like it like naturally evolved as like kind of the world was evolving, right? Which is
Exactly.
cool because I think a lot of people, this is good advice. A lot of people stay stuck in what they initially thought and they have a hard time pivoting their businesses to fit what the world.
Yeah, pivot. That's the word I
Yeah,
wanted.
that's so important. It's pretty amazing that you like organically did that. So let's talk a little bit about your work with like parenting, philosophy, and work like integration. I follow you on LinkedIn and a lot of it is about that. In your work with parents, what are like some common pressures you see? Let's take specifically moms. What do they struggle with?
Well, this whole thing of like the fact that parenting has become a verb, that
Mm,
you've got books and courses and blogs and articles and
right.
experts. Like my grandmother used to say, why can't people just work out what to do on their own? No one told me how to be a parent. And it's almost become like a bit of a competitive sport, especially with social media. I'm not on any social media other than LinkedIn, but I think a big challenge is being fed like these unrealistic expectations and this pressure to be a perfect parent whilst also holding down a career, and this concept that you can have it all. And I always say you can have it all, but not at the same time. And I think a lot of us fall into becoming parents. Like if we actually knew how hard it really is, we would never do it. So it's
That's where
like,
I'm at.
okay,
Yes.
don't ask, just jump in.
Okay, oh man.
And another myth as well, which working parents really discover, is you think that children need you to be around a lot more when they're young. And also a lot of the work that I do, like I do work with lots of law firms, easing parents in their transition back to work after they've been on leave. But it's amazing how much older kids, adolescents, even like 3 of my 4 kids are now adults, need you to be kind of present. Even though they're independent, it's like a different, like the mental capacity they take up. And we have to remember, like, we get the other challenges, you get so bogged down and sucked into the logistics of everyday life. But actually, our main job is to raise an adult. Like, we are thinking, what are the skills my child needs to succeed in life? Before we met today, I had 3 one-to-one calls with parents talking about school choices. And they're like, should I do this school, that school? And I'm like, what is the ultimate goal? Like, how do you envisage your child at 18? And then work backwards to see what kind of environment will help. That you can't control everything, but like having that vision of what the ultimate goal is gives you a sense of how to get to that journey.
It's so interesting because I think a lot of times parents are like kind of on survival mode and it's like what's gonna happen
Yeah.
today or tomorrow.
And there's nothing wrong with that as well, but
Yeah.
like
Also able to
step out
reframe
of
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you did
Yeah.
in one of your posts, you said that 80% of parenting is modeling. So again, I'm not a parent, and so I'm really interested in this conversation because I want to know as much as possible, you know, for myself and of course for listeners. So what is modeling?
Yeah. So it is quite a terrifying thought when I say that to parents, but basically kids of all ages, even the ones that you think are not paying any attention to you, they are observing everything you do. They're unbelievably tuned in, even before they can actually speak. And what we do is way more important than what we say. So if we want them to be honest, we need to model honesty. If we want to raise them to be kind and have good relationships, we need to model that in our interaction with others. And even our emotions, like in our brains, we have mirror neurons, which means we mirror the emotions of those people that are closest to us. So it's like one of the activities I love to do with parents. Where is the book? So I have, like, for years I ran a 10-week parenting course, and now I have like an online self-study version. But I don't know if you've come across Stephen Covey. He's got the 7 habits of highly effective people, families. This guy had 9 kids. And the habits are the same whether you're a parent or not. Habit number 2 is called begin with the end in mind. And he says to create a family mission statement. What are your core values? What are you and your family all about? And how are you modeling? So having that like conscious awareness of what actually really matters, and how are you modeling that to your children so you can try instill in them some of those values. Wow. Basically.
It is such a high number. I was also really shocked. But I think you're right. Like I sometimes say to my mom, I bring up things from my child and she's like, why would you know that? And I'm like, well, I was there. Kids listen, we hear, and it like seeps into our brain and it comes out like 20 years later without even knowing. I think that's such a fascinating thing. Something that I ask a lot of women on here is like how they feel about the word balance. And some people love it and some people are like there's no such thing. And something you talk about is integrating work and family, right? It's obviously a key part of what you do. And you say integrating rather than balance. So can you share like the difference and what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic of a lot of my webinars. So
Okay.
for me, balance is a set of scales. You know how, like, on Yom Kippur, we say God takes all the
Yes.
goods and the bad. And, like, this concept of you have work here and life here, and you're constantly, that is like beyond unrealistic. Sometimes work is here and
Right.
something's going on, and sometimes it's like this. And especially like since COVID, like, I know maybe not so much in the US, but there's still like this hybrid model of working from home, and you can't neatly put those two things into separate buckets. It's about finding harmony, integration between the two. And well, there's three. There's work, there's family, and then there's yourself. And what working parents or anyone with caring responsibilities are very good at is putting themselves last on the list, and then they can't really be very productive at work or the kind of parent that they want to be. So that's why I prefer to think about it
Yeah.
as boundaries or integration, and really thinking, what are my priorities? What really matters? How am I going to use my precious time and energy for the things that are important? And the reality is, you with kids or without kids, you will never have enough time to do everything that you want to do, need to do. And it's like, let's work out what really matters, and the rest will get done another
Yeah.
day or never.
Such a beautiful way of putting it. I really got to take that to heart. Is this why you dislike the term supermom?
Yeah, so the whole supermom thing, it's like, again, the unrealistic expectations, the perfection. I have 30 years of experience with parents, children. This is like a tiny amount of the books I've read on parenting and psychology, but I'm definitely not a supermom or a perfect parent. I'm just aiming for good enough.
Oh.
And with that term good enough, it's working out and defining, what does good enough mean to you? Because it means different things to different people. And when my kids were younger and I was a new mom, and also because I was a teacher, I focused way too much on education and logistics and extracurricular activities. And then I realized, and this is what all my parenting philosophy and course is about, the most important thing is my relationship and connection with my kids. And that's how you really influence them over time. Plus, back to modeling to your kids that you're a super parent is setting them up to be perfectionists and absolutely terrified of making mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's not a very good thing to model to your children either. So
Right.
it's really being open that, psychologists call it rupture and repair. You mess up, you shout at your child, you do something wrong, you just go back to them afterwards and say, like, I didn't deal with that so well, or I'm sorry, or I should have done this. And that's real life.
Yeah. I heard something the other day, like it's your parents' first time living too, which I found so interesting,
Yeah.
you know? And I actually had someone on the podcast. It was so interesting. She was talking about how a lot of kids struggle when they come from dysfunctional homes or have dysfunctional moms, but she struggled because her mother was hyper functional. And she always
Mm.
felt like what's wrong with me that I can't be as on top of things as my mom? And
Yeah.
that was it's exactly what you're saying. Mind blowing to me that you also have to be careful not to portray this like perfect image to your kid because that's just as detrimental, right? So
Exactly. It
fascinating.
puts a lot of pressure. I mean, I don't like the word balance, but when it comes to parenting,
Yeah.
like somewhere in the middle,
Yeah.
obviously not completely unengaged,
Yeah.
dysfunctional, but also not like hovering, helicoptering, everything has to be perfect, because like doesn't give any room for like,
Exactly. For growth, for figuring it out.
yeah,
Yeah. I want to ask you a personal question because the way I grew up, the background noise was kind of you're a stay-at-home mom mostly, unless you really need the money, because your kid should have a mom at home full time. And I love working. And so now, with women on the podcast, I'm hearing a different story. Your kids actually will benefit from a mom who feels, fulfilled and purposeful. So can you just we'll use me as an example. Can you give me some insight and advice on how to go about that?
I think it's interesting you say that, because there is a community in London which is like the equivalent of Mea Shearim in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So the most ultra Orthodox. And I met this amazing group of women that came to my synagogue, about 400 of them. They're not even allowed to drive in their community. They came on buses.
Wow.
And I was giving talk about work-life boundaries. And there was another religious one talking about how to use LinkedIn. And all of these women had like 9, 8, 9, 10 children, and they were the main breadwinners because their partners were learning. So even like, I think that's maybe shifted a bit, that women in the Orthodox community work. But there's benefits to working in terms of like having your own identity, because otherwise you completely throw yourself into your child. It can feel too intense. Like, there's one thing is about earning money independently. I have 3 daughters and they all like have learned that from me, that I'm not going, to my husband to ask him for money. But also 3 of my kids have finished, right? They finished school. Like, how would I feel? I don't know what I'd be doing all day. I mean, I'm lucky that I have a job that I love, but it's really important, like, to have, I think, to model to kids that you have something else going on in your life and work that enables you to feel fulfilled. And also for your kids, it encourages them to be more independent, because you're not so invested in them that you have nothing else to think about.
Yeah. I think for me, it's like I'm just thinking about what kind of mom would I be if I didn't have work? Because I know myself, like I need to be working to be at my best, right? And I think maybe for another woman where it's not about working, it's more about doing something purposeful with her day besides her kid. Maybe that looks like volunteering or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But, yeah. So it's definitely something I'm trying to navigate, and it's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, like having Jewish women with similar values to me, because we all have somewhat of an underlying foundation of values because of Judaism and the way we're brought up, but also having these incredible careers and identities and their own, unique stories really helps me. So it's like, definitely I started this selfishly, let's just say that. So let's pivot, not really pivot, but a lot of your work is identity and inclusion work and all that kind of stuff. And so it's interesting, and you talk about this yourself, that you for a while were nervous about sharing a part of your identity. And let me just quote you: for far too long, I have not brought my whole self to work. Even though you work in like the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, why do you think that you didn't like show up fully as yourself?
Well, with most aspects, I think the reason why, 25 years later, I'm still doing this work and people are still saying it's so helpful and having an impact is because for other areas, I'm very authentic.
Okay.
With the parenting talks, I'm always drawing on all the times I've messed up, things like going through pregnancy loss, like all the times that I've, all the challenges. And when I was working for someone else, I was really open about being Jewish. So I worked in a Jewish school, I worked in a non-Jewish school. And before I went to the interview, I was like, just by the way, there's no point interviewing me if you can't let me leave early in the winter on Fridays and I have these holidays. And like, I hadn't even gone for the job, but I'd already said, look, I'm Jewish, don't want to waste your time. Is that okay? I never really thought about it, why I was hiding until the 7th of October. But before then, I was like, my grandmother is German, Holocaust survivor, hidden in a convent in Rome. So you have this kind of just natural, innate subconscious fear. I do not enjoy getting into politically charged conversations. So I actually have a home in Israel. I spend a lot of time there. If someone like in work's making conversation, what are you doing this summer? I'd say, oh, I'm going to France. Like, I feel really bad, but like, I don't. And also, like, maybe I run my own business, right? Maybe they don't want to work with me if I'm Jewish. So I think it was like a bit of like, I don't need to open up that part of my life because people won't really understand.
It's so interesting that it's like we have this like innate fear of, being completely ourselves. Like, it just reminds me of like when they came, like when my ancestors came to America and they couldn't say they're Jewish because they wouldn't get work. It sounds like there's still like these remnants in us without, like, subconsciously, without even us knowing.
Yeah, but it wasn't probably even true. Now it might be, but then we've been in a golden era. It's like something I made up and I never really thought about. But if I saw something referring to something Jewish on LinkedIn, I wouldn't even like it. It's terrible,
Yeah.
but that's what I was doing.
Yeah, I think it's such a common thing. I think it's more common than we talk about how many people in the professional world were just not, it's not like they were specifically hiding, it's just that they would not, exactly what you're saying, like the posts and, share the things. So what happened after October 7th that kind of like turned this light bulb on?
Okay, so basically, I was in Israel on October the 7th with my younger two kids. And after Shabbat went out, we were putting our sukkah away, we're in the garden, and we heard gunshots. So we went into the house, turned off all the lights, and it was very scary. One of my kids was at university in England. She called me that night and she said, my friend that he was in my form at school has been murdered. My friend's brother is a hostage. So she went to camp every year in Israel with Hirsch Goldberg, Poland's sister. So like this was day one, and it wasn't about me, but already my family is like there's immediate links. And then I managed to get back to London, and everyone was just like frozen, like what the hell is going on? Yeah. And I was like, how can I post about anything else? Like this is nonsense. Everything felt meaningless. But I was like, forget about this hiding. Like, I'm telling everyone that your Jewish colleagues, clients, suppliers, whoever they are not okay. Yeah. I'm not okay. They're not okay. 8th of October, people are celebrating the death of Jews. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I wrote that and I sent an email to about 20,000 of my clients. So for not saying anything, I was like, wow. Yeah. And then people started phoning, emailing. So like HR, I've been running a law firm for 27 years and we're not treating this like we don't know the right thing to do. Do we make a statement? This, that. It's like chaos. It wasn't being dealt with like any other global event. And I was like, wow, like I work in this world of culture and inclusion, and now something's happening to my own community. I don't know what to do, but I can't sit here and do nothing. And I started to think within this whole kind of DEI, which I know has got its own issues in the US at the moment, religion was not really one of the things that companies, like they think it's very polarizing. So they do what I call fun food and festivals. So they say, oh, it's Diwali, it's Hanukkah, it's Ramadan, it's whatever, or we know we have to have kosher or halal food, or you need a prayer room, but that's it. And Jews are really misunderstood because a lot of us have white skin. So it's easier for us to hide our ethnicity and our identity. And as part of those anti-Semitic tropes, we are seen as privileged. We only look after ourselves. We are wealthy. We control the media and the banks and the government. So no one needs to worry about us or look after us. And so we don't go for the same rule book. Like everyone knows racism, homophobia, all those things, it's not okay. But when it comes to Jews, there's a book, I don't know if you know it in the US, but there's a British guy who wrote a book called Jews Don't Count, which pretty much sums up. And even the term anti-Semitism is really confusing. Like Semitism is a language. How can you be like, I think now I'm using the term anti-Jewish racism. Everyone knows what racism is. And all we're asking is that you understand this is a form of racism just like any other, and a lot of people, now you've got the whole thing confusing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. They're like, oh, I'm not anti-Semitic. I just don't agree with the policies of Israel. Fine. But why are you attacking a Jew in the US or Canada or the UK? Like, that's just because you say it's in the name of Israel, but really it's because they're Jewish.
Yeah, they're just putting a different label on it. So they were starting to reach out to you after you sent out this mass email, basically. And how did you start actually doing work, like professionally, with these companies and organizations?
Okay, so I called someone who I've kind of met once. I didn't know her very well. She's called Michal Oshman. She's Israeli. She's lived in the UK like 25 years. She worked in talent and leadership at Facebook. She was the global head of culture at TikTok. She was also deeply embedded in this language of culture and inclusion, but from within organizations. And I was like, I'm actually just too scared to approach this on my own. I don't know how to do it. And I was also crying the whole time. I don't know what the right thing to do. Like for 2 months, I wasn't thinking straight. We were all... And it's like, I'm going to call her up. And what we did initially is we hosted, like, after I'd sent this email, I was like, okay, we don't have the answers, but let's just have some conversations. Anyone can join, Jewish, not Jewish, whatever your issue. Let's just chat. And we did that, and we listened. And then we did some work with like some like Jewish networks or Jewish people within an organization. Sometimes we were just speaking to the board of a company, but it's moved on now to thinking we just want to educate the whole organization. We are not activists. We are not, I did a history degree, but we are not experts in anti-Semitism. We're not looking to kind of fight. All we're trying to do is say this, and no politics. This is the experience of one group of people. And if you've got these values as an organization, you need to make sure that every employee feels psychologically and physically safe when they're at work. So what we're trying to do is get under the skin of companies and leaders and use the language that they understand to just open their eyes, touch their hearts, educate their minds, answer their questions. We always say, like, there's no political correctness as Jews. Like, any question is a good question. And people can't invest in a whole load of training. We just get 1 hour. 1 hour, have as many people come as possible. I spend like 10, 12 minutes talking about the history of anti-Semitism and say this has been going on for thousands of years. You know, you show a 13th century manuscript of a Jew holding money with a big note. Where's this idea of Jews and monies come from? You know, it's like, and then we share our everyday experience. Michal also has 4 kids and is a granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. This is our experience as mothers in the UK. You know, is it okay for me to walk to synagogue and people saying gas the Jews? My 18-year-old is not going to university in the UK anymore because of what's going on here. So like, and people are like, oh, like, you know, London, this tolerant, multicultural city. You look like you're white with blonde hair, not fake blonde hair, but like, you know, like, wow, that's really not okay. I had no idea. And they wouldn't know because we don't want to, we're quiet about it. We don't want to draw attention to ourselves. It's difficult to talk about. A lot of people are leaving jobs because they've had problems and they're not saying why. They're just like, I'll go somewhere else. And so that's what I'm trying to help people to understand, how it impacts them in the workplace. Yeah. But if on your journey to work, you've got a bag of food that says kosher and you have to put that inside another bag because you're worried about what the person, you know, it's going to impact how we show up. Or if you've seen your colleague suddenly wearing a kafir or celebrating like on the 9th of October on social media, great, it's amazing, you know, freedom fighters, river to the sea. My friend's a midwife. She's working with other midwives who came to her wedding and now she realizes what they actually think. You don't feel safe at work. And I'm just bringing it back to the workplace. Like if you just start there and say that is not okay, then they start to think about the ripple effect.
I think it's so important because everyone kind of notices it in their kind of what they're surrounded with, right? So if you're a college student, you notice anti-Semitism is a huge problem in college campuses. You know, it's all about what you know. And so the people that notice it have to do things, because if I worked for a corporate company and noticed this and didn't say anything, then how would other companies or people know that this is not okay? So I think it's so amazing that you were saying this and actually did something. Like it's really special, and we all have to kind of speak up when we notice it in the things that are basically obvious to us every day.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I hate doing it. Like,
Really?
I would rather speak about parenting. I've cried in session. It's like every time I say the whole thing again, I'm like, what am I actually saying? I'm saying stuff like that my grandmother said about 1930s Germany, and I never thought any of this stuff would happen again, but it's like, it's just there rippling under the surface. And actually, we've been in this golden era. What we're having now is probably more of the norm, but we just never experienced it before. Yeah. And what I try to do is be the voice. Like, my experience is not every Jewish person's experience, obviously. And I say that that Judaism, for a lot of people, it has nothing to do with religious practice. It's much more of a people, a culture. It's like some people didn't even feel Jewish at all, but now they do, and they want that connection and that community. But you can't expect someone within an organization you can't go to them and say what's going on for you, because they're not going to just start this difficult conversation.
Yeah.
But when we come in and we share what's going on a little bit, then it opens up. It's creating a safe space for other people to share. And some of the people who share are like, I'm actually not Jewish, but my girlfriend is, and this is the impact it's had on her. And then we've had unbelievable moments with like a Muslim lady. It's like, I have family in Gaza, and you've helped me to understand that it's not about sides. Like, if you have empathy for one group of people, it doesn't mean you can't have empathy for another.
Yeah.
And like, especially at work, we can't keep thinking like you've got two different sides, but we're all just humans, and there is so much more that unites us rather than divides us. And that's not me being like hippie, it's peace for everyone. It's just like, treat people with humanity.
Yeah. I do think the reason why what you're doing is so important is because education is at the heart of it. Because if you're not knowledgeable, you have no idea how to interact with people who don't agree with you at all, right? You can't have, let's say, an argument. You can't have a dialogue. You can't have a conversation. It's not about changing minds. It's just that knowledge and facts is basically the foundation of it all. So I think it's so important. I'm curious though, like, are companies, organizations, are they open to this, or are you, I know some reached out, but are you kind of like pulling teeth here?
A little bit, because, and it's not necessarily because they don't want to do it, but there is a huge amount of fear. What they don't want is even more polarization, and there are some very loud voices. So there's been a lot of like, can you team up with someone and do an hour, like half an hour on anti-Semitism and half an hour on Islamophobia? And what I say is, this conversation is about one community. It is absolutely not at the expense of anyone else. It is not saying, it's not a competition of who is suffering the most. Today, we're talking about Jews. Tomorrow, we might talk about living with autism, or having family in Gaza, or whatever it is, experiencing pregnancy loss, or going through the menopause. But like today, we're having this conversation. And that's the other thing that's difficult. All the whataboutery, we call it. Like, the minute you say one thing, they say, well, what about this?
Right.
And so we're focusing on this today, giving you some like diving into one group of people's experience.
Wow.
You don't have to be an expert in the Middle East to start a conversation and just to ask someone, how are you really doing? Like, I know you have family, and that's the other thing that people have really struggled with, is the deathly silence. And in my world, especially the silence from heads of inclusion, which is all about being inclusive for everyone, unless you're Jewish. And a lot of people
really
won't
hard
admit
to see.
that.
Yeah, it's such a tricky thing. What advice would you give to employees and companies that are experiencing this but are so terrified to say anything? They don't want to be looked at as different, or they don't want to get, whatever, worst case, fired, all the different types of fears.
No, it's really, really hard. And the interesting thing about this is got nothing to do with levels of seniority. So I have spoken to CEOs who employ 16,000 people, and even they are like nervous to, there's all sorts of stuff because of doing this work. I mean, I spent an hour and a half with someone today about a terrible story of somewhere she's worked for 25 years, very, very senior. She's had to take a sabbatical. She hasn't told them why, but it's because of this.
Oh my gosh.
And so everyone's feeling very, just the state of the world, it's very difficult, very draining, very scary. But also, I would say that there are a lot of people that are very loud, but there are a lot of people, the majority are in the middle, that just don't know. They don't really care. Like, how much do we know about what's going on in certain parts of the world? They just, and interestingly, through this work, and a lot of people say, no, that's not true, but they do want to listen. They do want to learn beyond what they're being fed by, social media and other media outlets. And you can say to them, like I said, you don't have to know the history of anti-Semitism. You don't need to be an expert in any of this to just start a conversation and understand the experience of a Jewish person. And there is that blind spot. So if you can say, if you're struggling at work, the problem is the person you might be going to could have very different views about you. But if you say, look, this is your company ethos, these are your company values, this is what it says on the tin, but I am experiencing, it's all about what you experience. If you feel that you can't be yourself, express who you are, that is a form of kind of racism and discrimination, and it needs to be condoned just in the same way as hatred is for other minority groups.
Yeah.
And just talk, start conversations, even if it feels hard.
It's definitely hard. I mean, even you're saying you hate this work, but it's, the responsibility you took upon yourself.
Every time I do it after a session, like sometimes it's online, I've done the US, Australia, I literally just want to get in my bed and put the covers in, and like it's draining. So draining and so difficult. But each time when I get that response and feedback, I know it's like a mission. I know it's really important work, and if I can get in front of people and educate them, I've got to do it.
Wow, it's amazing. So I want to ask you, like, what do you see happening for Educating Matters? Like, where do you want to take it? Are you still wanting to do the parenting stuff? Are you trying to combine it? Like, I know you kind of took this mission on, again, organically. Where do you see it going?
Well, I'd love most of my time to still be on the parenting side, and for there not to be a need for this other stuff. But when people come to me, I'll still do it. I imagine just carrying on supporting parents around the world for as long as I can talk. I want to write a book and do lots of things.
Amazing.
I'd also love to do more. I mean, I do quite a lot in the US, but I'm terrible at sales and marketing. Everything is through word of mouth. So if anyone listening is working in America or other,
most of my audience is American, so this would be good for
okay. I mean, I work a lot with the US because a lot of my clients will open it up globally. So I still love talking about parenting, but as a business, we're just covering more and more broad topics. And like I said, like every conversation with every client, this week I've got 3 new ideas for topics. I just don't know where it's going. I just start a conversation, listen to what people need, and try and provide it. So
the way I end off the podcast is by asking all my guests the same question, which is what being a trailblazer means to them. So Rachel, what does it mean to you?
I think it means like having the courage to do something because you know it's the right thing to do, or because it's required and it makes sense, even if no one else is doing it. So it's like stepping into uncharted territory, maybe having a vision and doing something new and taking the initiative. So when I set up my business, there was no family networks, there was no D&I or well-being in a job title. I kind of just made something up that made sense and went with it. And other people weren't doing that at the time. And now, my LinkedIn feed was packed with coaches and companies providing all sorts of well-being stuff. But back in 2001, no one was really doing that. And that's kind of, I guess, with the anti-Semitism, it's obviously an old topic. I'm not trailblazing, but it's the way I'm doing it. It's not a dry history lesson. It's like real life stories in the context of the workplace. And so I guess it's just having the courage to do something that maybe other people aren't doing, but you think it's right.
Yeah. I would say your anti-Semitism work is maybe in a different way, but the fact that you're doing something because it's a mission, and even though it's exhausting and sad and terrifying, you're still doing that. That's, in my opinion, 100% trailblazing. So thank you so much for coming on here, sharing your story, and doing the work that you're doing. We need more people like you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for finding me.